Our top story claims that a passenger plane that crashed in Kazakhstan was brought down by Russian air defenses. 67 people were on board the plane and dozens were killed. Moscow says it's too early to draw conclusions about what happened. Also tonight, the head of the World Health Organization says he was meters away from Israeli airstrikes on Yemen's Sana'a airport. 20 years on from a disaster that killed more than 200,000 people, events are held to remember those who died in the Boxing Day tsunami. A man is arrested after 2 women were killed in a Christmas Day attack in Milton Keynes. And in sport, more pain for Pep as Manchester City failed to win again. Plus, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30. Good evening. We begin with reports that a passenger plane which crashed yesterday in Kazakhstan was brought down by Russian air defense systems. 38 people were killed when an Azerbaijan Airlines plane crashed near the city of Aktau. 67 people were on board the flight from Baku in Azerbaijan to Grozny in the Chechen area of southern Russia. Russian news agencies said the flight was rerouted due to fog and it came down on the opposite shore of the Caspian Sea. Sky's Rob Harris reports.
Filming the final anxious moments before the plane crashed, this passenger is heard praying. God is great, he says. As oxygen masks fall and panic grips the cabin, a flight attendant urges passengers to stay calm and keep their seatbelts fastened. And the man who captured this footage was among 29 survivors, walking from the wreckage at the crash site in Kazakhstan. But 38 people did die. And Russia is being blamed for unintentionally downing the Azerbaijan Airlines plane. Struck by their air defense system, according to sources in Azerbaijan familiar with the crash investigation. The plane had diverted hundreds of miles from its intended destination of Grozny. The capital of Russia's Chechen Republic has been the target of drone attacks as Ukraine strikes back against the invasion. Russia's aviation watchdog quickly claimed the pilot was attempting an emergency landing after a bird strike, rather than Moscow fending off drones. But with small holes clear on the plane's fuselage, expert cast doubt on that explanation.
Looking at the pictures of the shrapnel in the aircraft, in the tail of the aircraft, it looks very much like a surface-to-air missile exploded probably 30 to 50 meters to the left rear of the aircraft. And the shrapnel from that, it's misunderstood how these missiles work. They don't actually strike the aircraft, they explode near it and they send shrapnel out. And in this case, it seems to have damaged the rear of the aircraft and the hydraulic systems in particular that affect the flight controls.
But as 9 Russian survivors were evacuated to Moscow, no admission of culpability from the Kremlin.
The investigation is ongoing. Any incident should be investigated by special aviation authorities, and it would be wrong to make hypotheses before investigators make their verdict. We should wait till the end of the investigation.
In Baku, from where the flight departed, it was a day of mourning. And while Azerbaijan is a key ally of Russia, an investigation source called for an admission of responsibility, even if the plane was not shot down deliberately. The heroics of the pilots ensured some passengers survived while they did not. Now pressure is mounting on the Kremlin to explain if this disaster could have been avoided.
And Rob has the latest now on the incident.
The early thesis out of Baku that Russian air defences were responsible for downing the Azerbaijan Airlines plane now being echoed by a US official who says that their early indications are that Russian anti-aircraft systems did strike the plane that crashed in Kazakhstan. It has not been fully explained why the plane did have to divert off course, why it was attempting to land in Kazakhstan. One theory suggested from Moscow is that a bird strike was responsible, but then we saw those images from the plane's tail section clearly showing many holes, which did indicate perhaps some form of shrapnel damage. And it did happen in an area where Russia has been downing Ukrainian drones. We've seen even this week in Grozny, where this plane was actually headed towards, where apparently there were drone attacks in the Chechen region. And Russia has been having to fend off many drone attacks from Ukraine as Kyiv tries to fight back against Russia as the invasion does continue. Now, there was Ukrainian attacks even on Kazan, on buildings there in the last week. Even the threat has reached Moscow itself, and experts say this has caused great embarrassment to Russian President Vladimir Putin, and there's a lot of pressure to attempt to bring down these drones to prevent this very visual damage that's being caused to buildings, bringing the war in Ukraine right onto Russian territory. And this does reinforce the concerns about Russian airspace safety. And we have heard from one airline, Israel's national carrier El Al, that they have actually suspended flights to Moscow over the next week, given the concerns about the safety of the airspace. And Moscow's airports actually did have to close very briefly today as well. But we do await still to get any form of formal word from the results of this investigation from Azerbaijan, from Kazakhstan, or indeed from Russia, which has said that everyone has to wait for the full investigation to be concluded.
The head of the World Health Organization says he was at Yemen's Sana'a airport when it was hit by Israeli airstrikes. The Israeli military has acknowledged carrying out the strikes and says it also attacked Houthi rebel targets in Yemen's western coastal strip and further inland.
A little while ago, the Air Force attacked targets of the Houthi terrorist organisation in Yemen, both on the coastline and in Sana'a. We are determined to root out this terrorist arm of Iran's axis of evil. We will persist in this until we complete the job.
Sky's Yusra El-Bagir is in Jerusalem for us. Yusra, we just heard Benjamin Netanyahu saying that they will persist until they achieve their aims. Is this a sign of yet further escalation in the conflict in the Middle East?
It does feel like that, Barbara. It definitely feels like an escalation, a turning point. The rhetoric around these strikes has been quite extreme, I would say, or even celebratory from Netanyahu and senior officials. Netanyahu says they are just getting started, and we did hear from his defense minister 2 days ago that they are coming for Houthi leadership. Now, with this attack on Houthi-held territory in northern Yemen, they certainly came for UN leadership. Dr. Tedros, the Director General of the World Health Organization, says he was just 2 meters away from the attack on Sana'a airport, and he shared this post on X. He says, as we were about to board our flight from Sana'a about 2 hours ago, the airport came under aerial bombardment. One of our plane's crew members was injured. My UN and World Health Organization colleagues and I are safe. Now, I think the attack on Sana'a airport and its proximity to such a well-known senior UN official raises some questions around the attack itself. Did Israel know that Dr. Tedros was there and didn't care, or do they not have the surveillance capacity when it comes to Houthi-held Yemen to know where they're targeting and what kind of activity is happening in these areas? This is civilian air infrastructure that they've hit after, days of Houthi missiles making it through defense interceptors to wound civilians in Tel Aviv and surrounding areas. I think the question is, do they know their enemy? The Houthis are fairly new to Israel. They don't share a border with Yemen. They don't have the decades of rubbing up against them like they do with Hezbollah in Lebanon. Do they know what the Houthis are capable of? Do they know their movement? And will they be able to do the surveillance-style military warfare that they're used to?
And, Yusra, we're talking about the escalation across the region, but meanwhile, the war continues in Gaza and Israeli airstrikes continue on Gaza. What more can you tell us about that?
I mean, it's been days of hearing about Israeli assaults on healthcare infrastructure. We've been hearing about attacks on Kamal Al-Auda Hospital, on Al-Adwan Hospital, on Al-Auda Hospital, on the Indonesian hospital. We've heard of healthcare workers being injured just over the last few days. And then this morning, of course, there was this airstrike that hit 5 journalists, and we saw really incredibly grief-filled videos coming out of Gaza in a mass funeral that had come from a single airstrike. Now, the IDF says that these journalists were Islamic Jihad operatives, that they were undercover, but we also are aware that there have been over 190 journalists killed under Israeli fire since the start of the war, according to the Palestinian Union of Journalists. And the Committee to Protect Journalists has also said that at least 133 journalists, Palestinian journalists, have been killed in 14 months. So there has been an escalation. And what is is so concerning as people wait for a ceasefire in Israel and occupied Palestinian territories is that there's an escalation in airstrikes, but there's also really no respect for the rules of war. We're seeing journalists and we're seeing healthcare workers be targeted relentlessly. This isn't just a cry of grief. It's an exclamation of relentless horror. A mother who's already endured so much, broken by the killing of her son. Press jackets mark the body bags in this mass funeral. 5 less journalists to document the war in Gaza, and 5 more families left to deal with the loss.
His wife was about to give birth. The whole family was upstairs. I don't know what he did to deserve this. It all happened in front of me. I couldn't do anything.
This is all that remains. His brother and his colleagues were killed in an Israeli airstrike that hit the car as it was parked outside of a hospital. The bones of a burnt broadcasting van. This is footage from the channel the 5 men worked for. Visuals of the decimation by Israeli airstrikes on their home. The channel's been linked to the militant group Islamic Jihad, and the IDF claims they were Islamic Jihad operatives posing as journalists. Israel has prevented international media from entering Gaza and freely reporting on the ground. The Palestinian Journalists Union reports that more than 190 Palestinian journalists have been killed by Israeli fire since the start of the war.
The Palestinian journalist will deliver his message. The Palestinian journalist will complete his coverage. The Palestinian journalist will be in the field until his last breath.
These images of war have haunted the world for over 14 months. People picking apart the wreckage of their lives. A sight lived by the journalists that capture it as they too fight to survive. Yusra al-Bagher, Sky News.
People across the world have been remembering those who died in the Boxing Day tsunami 20 years ago. It was one of the worst natural disasters in modern history and devastated coastal communities across South and Southeast Asia. At 7:59 a.m. on December 26, 2004, the 9.1 magnitude quake struck off the west coast of North Sumatra in Indonesia. Indonesia, Sri Lanka, India, and Thailand bore the brunt of the tsunami that followed. It was so big that there were deaths as far away as South Africa. An estimated 230,000 people were killed, and a total of 1.7 million people were displaced by the disaster. Sky's Fraser Maud reports now on the tributes that took place today, 20 years on.
The sound to warn, used to mourn. Across Banda Aceh, sirens blared for 3 minutes. A moment of reflection at this mosque memorial. Exactly 20 years after the powerful earthquake struck off Indonesia's coast, triggering the massive tsunami that back then there were no warnings for. No time to flee as 100-foot waves created a path of debris and destruction, wiping out coastal communities, killing 165,000 in this one country in one day. Death on a scale they could not cope with and still cannot comprehend. Here in the village of Ulelwe, prayers at a mass grave, where more than 14,000 victims were buried, still unidentified, including Mohammed's 2 children.
Until now, we still miss them, and we don't know where they are. What is clear is that every year we always visit the mass graves to pray for them.
In Sri Lanka, where 2,000 passengers were killed on a train swept off the track by the tidal waves. And in Thailand, the sea is a constant reminder of the torrents that claimed the lives of Urai's 4-year-old daughter.
I won't come here at all because I have this feeling that the sea had taken my child. I'm very angry with it.
In Thailand, people gathered at a memorial ceremony in Bang Nam Ken, a small fishing village that took the brunt of the devastating wave in the country. The tsunami claimed 8,000 Thai lives. Nearly 400 bodies still remain unclaimed. West of the earthquake's epicenter, India too is remembering the loss of more than 16,000 lives. In the 20 years since the event, communities have been rebuilt and warning systems have been improved. But the devastation caused by this extreme natural disaster will live long in millions of memories. Fraser Maud, Sky News.
Well, 2 decades on since the Boxing Day tsunami, our Asia correspondent Cordelia Lynch has been to Khao Lak in Thailand to see how people are still rebuilding their lives. And a warning, her report shows bodies being recovered after the disaster.
Look at it, it's huge.
It is 20 years since the worst tsunami in history. Around 230,000 people died. On the shores of Khao Lak in Thailand, more than 5,000 lost their lives. Sutep was on his fishing boat when it suddenly hit.
What did it look and feel like?
I knew instinctively something was wrong and it was dangerous, but I didn't know what a tsunami was. The more I moved, the more the waves went against me. It was so strong.
How were you able to survive?
I held on to the gas tank. I didn't know how damaged everything was until the tide brought me back. Then I saw everything was destroyed.
20 years on, how does it feel looking back to that day now?
I still think about it all the time. I lost my mother, my father, my wife and my daughter. 10 members of my family. I'm still devastated.
Ampan's husband also died.
I was very discouraged because I lost everything. My house, my work, my husband.
How were you able to survive?
Someone came to my home and shouted, "There is a big wave, there is a big wave. Escape now." I went outside and looked and saw it and heard this very big, strange sound.
She rushed to find her husband at Yan Yao Temple, where bodies were piling up.
Finally, on December 28, I found him. It was 8 p.m. I could recognize him right away from his orange shirt and necklace.
Forensic scientists working here were overwhelmed and underprepared.
Thousands of bodies were laid on the ground here waiting to be identified. This tranquil temple was suddenly the focus of a huge international forensic effort and a gallery of grief.
Preah was just 23 at the time. She spent 41 days working and living amongst the dead.
Why was it so hard to identify the dead?
Practical challenges is that how to manage lots of bodies at the same time, how to identify the bodies before they decompose and then before all of the DNA or fingerprints degraded.
But amidst that desperation, Ampan and Sutep, both in mourning, eventually found each other. They've been married now for 17 years.
What has it meant to you to find love after all that loss?
It's good. He also lost his partner, so we are the same. And we've been able to build a life together.
It's heartwarming. Our hearts just connected.
These are the graves of those who have never been identified. Now there are at least tsunami warning systems in place. Trauma still lingers, but there's plenty of hope and healing too. Cordelia Lynch, Khao Lak, Thailand.
2 women have died and a man and a teenage boy have suffered serious injuries after a stabbing attack yesterday in Milton Keynes. Police were called to a block of flats on Santa Cruz Avenue in Bletchley after a 999 call. A 49-year-old man has been arrested. Well, Sky's Amelia Harper is at the scene for us. Amelia, what else do we know?
Well, a double murder investigation has been opened after 2 women died following reports of a stabbing here in Milton Keynes on Christmas Day. Thames Valley Police also said that a dog was injured in the incident and that also died after it was taken to the vets. We don't have that much information about what unfolded here, but we do know that officers were called to the scene at just after 6:30 p.m. yesterday. The 2 women aged 38 and 24 sadly died at the scene and their next of kin have been informed. 2 other males were also seriously injured, a man and a teenage boy. They are in a stable condition, though, in hospital. And now a 49-year-old man from Milton Keynes has been arrested on suspicion of murder and attempted murder, and he's currently in custody. In terms of what's going on here tonight, forensics are coming in and out, doing what they need to do as they conduct their inquiries, and there will be a large police presence, police say, for the time to come while they do their work.
Amelia Harper with the latest there from Bletchley. Amelia, thank you. Also tonight, Israel's Attorney General has ordered police to open an investigation into Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's wife. Sarah Netanyahu is accused of harassing political opponents and witnesses in her husband's corruption trial. Benjamin Netanyahu is charged with fraud, breach of trust and accepting bribes. He denies the charges. India's former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh has died at the age of 92. He had been admitted to hospital after losing consciousness at home but could not be revived. He was one of India's longest-serving prime ministers and is widely known as the architect of the country's economic reform program. There's been a big fall in the number of shoppers in the Boxing Day sales. Footfall across all retail destinations up to midday was down 9.4% from last year. The numbers back up recent poor retail sales figures and put more pressure on the government as the economy flatlines. Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch has accused the leader of Reform UK of faking an increase in his party's membership. It follows claims from Reform leader Nigel Farage that his party has surpassed the number of Tory members.
In fact, we've done it. We're through. We're through. How about that? The official opposition. It's going to be a long day.
But Ms. Badenoch said her party had gained thousands of new members. Writing on social media, she said, because millions of good people in our country are crying out for hope, some of them think reform are the answer. But as we saw today, reform will let them down. They'll say anything for cheap media hits because they have no plan underneath, just rage against the machine. Mr. Farage has since responded, saying, "We understand you are bitter, upset and angry that we are now the second biggest party in British politics and that the Conservative brand is dying under your leadership. However, this is not an excuse to accuse us of committing fraud." This is Sky News. Coming up, Manchester United lost yet again, this time to Wolves. Your Boxing Day sport is next.
Mayhem in the Middle East, rippling in America's West.
Get back! Get back!
The resolve of these protesters is now being seriously tested. I saw police being forced or pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests.
None of this is a peaceful protest.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles. How are you feeling?
I am angry.
It is an anti-woman agenda.
Sky News, get the full story first. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support, but it's nasty out there.
Can you beat Donald Trump, Governor? President Biden, do you trust President Xi? President Biden says that this meeting went well. He said real progress was made on a whole host of issues. Will your candidates win?
I hope so. I think they will. I think they're great candidates.
There's no doubt that Kamala Harris and her team are harnessing the power of social media. Do you think Kamala is brat?
Kamala's brat.
Were you scared?
Yeah, we were scared. It was terrible.
strong wind, building tearing down.
As them say, our God works, so we can't do nothing.
The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way. Free wherever you get your news.
Excited. I've had severe nightmares of these people coming in and just taking me in the middle of the night.
Ghislaine Maxwell has pleaded not guilty to all 6 charges against her. Mum, how are you feeling today?
Jeffrey said, you answer to Ghislaine, you just don't cross her.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
I'm James Matthews and I'm Sky's US correspondent, based here in Washington, D.C. Donald Trump, it would appear, is about to learn his fate. There's no doubting the strength of this hurricane as it roars through. Sky News, get the full story first. Do you fear a 4th indictment?
He's from Sky News. He's from Sky News. He's entitled to ask me questions.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Let's get the latest sport now from Sky Sports News and Rahul.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality. Getting more people more active. Live life with Vitality.
You certainly need to have one eye on what if this doesn't work out.
Sometimes when you do get released, it's a little bit of a dark place.
I think there's so much ask and demand from academies. You need to give them a plan B as well.
My journey into academy football showed how some of the game's top players have made it through the system. But now I want to know what happens to some of those that don't. Coming up in this episode, we hear some harrowing stories from people who fell out of football.
Do you know what? I knew he was gone.
You just can't even begin to comprehend it.
Honestly, the truth, I'd go out to the car park and I'd be having a breakdown.
Apparently Matthew says that's 200.
I've got videos of him kicking the ball forever. All he was doing was keep ups all the time, playing football in the garden, on holiday, and this, that and the other. So he'd love it. He'd love to play football, making sure he was the best he could be. That was his life.
Matthew Langton was 20 when he took his own life back in 2021. All he'd ever dreamed of was becoming a professional footballer.
The morning he took his life, he was supposed to leave work at 7 and he'd left at 5. Nobody noticed till 6. And they rang him and he didn't answer. Just after 6:30, I got woke up. I don't know what woke me up, but I woke up. I just knew straight away, I knew. I went next door to get the neighbours for help and Richie, our next door neighbour, started CPR on him. Do you know what? I knew he was gone. I just knew it. His bedroom's been untouched for 3 years. He's got his Xbox, he's got his hanging up his Mansfield stuff, his Derby stuff, his football boots. Everything's as he was, but he's not there. It's like being in a shop and someone's got, you've lost your kid and you're forever searching. I'm forever searching for Matthew.
It's something no parents could ever imagine, but his mother Maxine wants Matthew's story to be heard. So does his teammate, Cayman Cashmore.
He was a great guy. He used to make me laugh all the time. I mean, I've got a video on my phone of Matty playing my guitar. He didn't know how to play a guitar.
You like that one?
and he's there making up a song, and it's hilarious. It's all we have. We have memories like that, playing PlayStation, going gym. I always used to go gym with Matty. Me and him were quite similar in the fact like we just say stupid jokes and have a laugh. But then when it came to football, we both liked playing with each other, and it was great.
Are you absolutely convinced that his dream to be a footballer and the slow deterioration of that, with the rejection from Derby, then the rejection from Mansfield, that had a huge impact on his mental health?
I think that was the big factor of his deterioration. I do think it coincided at the worst time ever with lockdown. He couldn't have contact with anybody. And he was working nights at Tesco. I don't even know towards the end whether he was even interested in football, but that was him. His identity was a footballer.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's papers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by barrister and broadcaster Bobby Friedman and writer and broadcaster Amy Nicole-Turner. Welcome both. Among the stories we'll be discussing this on the front of the Financial Times. Their headline, Russian military accused of shooting down Azerbaijan passenger aircraft. We'll be right back.